Margaret Bennett had been married to Richard for 42 years. At 70, she thought she knew everything about the man who shared her life. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, where maple trees lined the streets and neighbors still waved from their porches. Margaret was a woman of grace and dignity. Her dark curly hair, now touched with silver, framed a face that had witnessed both joy and sorrow. She wore her traditional gold jewelry with pride, gifts from Richard over the decades, each piece marking a milestone in their lives together. Their daughter, Claire, lived across town with her husband, David. Claire was a therapist, thoughtful and observant, with her mother's kind eyes and her father's practical nature. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Margaret was in her garden, tending to her roses, when her phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Mom, I'm sending you something. It was meant for David, but a broken bar, you need to hear it. I'm so sorry. Call me after." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she went inside. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, the one where afternoon light pooled like honey, and opened the audio file. At first, she heard only rustling sounds. Then Richard's voice, unmistakable and clear. "I can't keep doing this, Patricia." Margaret suspects nothing, "But I feel the weight of it every day." A woman's voice responded, younger, unfamiliar. "Richard, you promised. You said after the anniversary party, you'd tell her. You'd choose me." Margaret's heart stopped. She listened to the entire conversation. 3 minutes that shattered 4 decades. They spoke of secret meetings, of a relationship that had lasted 2 years, of Richard's promises to leave Margaret after their upcoming 45th anniversary celebration, of the party Margaret herself was planning. That evening, Margaret moved through dinner preparations like a ghost. She set the table. She cooked Richard's favorite meal, a pot roast with roasted vegetables. She said nothing. Richard arrived home at 6. As always, he kissed her cheek. As always, he asked about her day. As always, it was lovely, Margaret said calmly. "I worked in the garden. Clara sent me a message." She watched his face. Nothing. No flicker of guilt or fear. They ate dinner. They watched the evening news. Richard fell asleep in his recliner, snoring softly, while Margaret sat across from him, studying the face she loved for so long, wondering how much of their life had been a lie. That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Grief rolled over her in waves. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. Not rage. Exactly. Something quieter. Something that had been sleeping for many years. Clarity. The next morning, Margaret called Claire. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Clara said, her voice breaking. "David and I have been talking. You can stay with us. We'll help you find a lawyer." No," Margaret said gently. "I have a different plan." Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret moved with careful precision. She visited her lawyer, Eleanor, a sharp woman in her 60s who'd handled her mother's estate years before. "I want to understand my options," Margaret said. "I want to know what's mine." Eleanor explained everything. The house was in both names, the retirement accounts, the investments, 42 years of shared finances, carefully documented. "Oregon is a no-fault divorce state," Eleanor said, "but there are ways to protect yourself." Margaret listened, taking notes in her elegant handwriting. She also began her own investigation. She was surprised how easy it was. Richard's computer password was their anniversary tab. How fitting. His email revealed everything: hotel receipts, love letters, plans for a future that didn't include Margaret. Patricia Chen was 52, a widow Richard had met at a business conference. The messages painted a picture of a man who felt he'd earned a late-life romance, who viewed his marriage as an obligation completed rather than a bond still living. Margaret continued planning the anniversary party. She sent invitations. She booked the country club. She ordered flowers and arranged the menu. Richard seemed pleased but distracted. He was often out meeting clients or working late. Margaret simply smiled and told him not to worry about the party details. "You've worked so hard all these years," she said. "Let me handle this." 3 days before the party, Margaret made her move. She met with Eleanor one final time. Papers were drawn up. Accounts were protected. Then Margaret did something that surprised even her daughter. She called Patricia. "This is Margaret Bennett," she said when the woman answered. "I believe you know my husband, Richard." Silence. Then, "Mrs. Bennett, yeah, broken bar, I don't know what to say. I'd like to invite you to our anniversary party. Margaret said calmly. "This Saturday at the Portland Hills Country Club, 7 o'clock. I think you should be there." "Yeah, broken bar. Why would you a broken bar?" "Because the truth should be witnessed," Margaret said, "and because I think you deserve to know who Richard really is." She hung up before Patricia could respond. The anniversary party arrived. The country club ballroom glowed with candlelight. 70 guests filled the room, of family, friends, neighbors, Richard's colleagues. Margaret wore a stunning gold gown, the same color as the jewelry she'd worn throughout her marriage. She looked radiant, her hair styled beautifully, her bearing proud. Richard, handsome in his tuxedo, worked the room with the confidence of a man who believed himself secure. At 8 o'clock, Margaret tapped her glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice clear and steady. 42 years ago, I married Richard Bennett, believing I'd found my partner for life. Tonight, I want to share some truths about marriage, about love, and about the courage it takes to face reality. Richard smiled, unsuspecting. Margaret continued, "I recently discovered that Richard has been conducting a relationship with another woman for the past 2 years. Her name is Patricia Chen, and I invited her here tonight." "Patricia, if you're here, please stand." The room erupted in gasps. All eyes turned. Near the back, a horrified woman in a blue dress stood reluctantly, her face pale. Richard's smile vanished. "Margaret, what are you?" "I'm not finished," Margaret said. Her voice remained calm, but something steel-hard glinted beneath it. "I also discovered that Richard planned to leave me after tonight's celebration. What he didn't plan on was accountability." She turned to face him directly. "Richard, I've spent 42 years building a life with you. I raised our daughter. I supported her career. I made our house a home. And you repaid that with betrayal and lies." Clara stood beside her mother now, tears streaming down her face but her expression resolute. Margaret opened a folder on the podium. "I filed for divorce. The papers were served to your office this afternoon. I've also taken steps to protect my share of everything we built together. Eleanor, my attorney, is here tonight to ensure everything is witnessed and legal." She paused, letting the words settle. "But more than that, Richard, I want you to understand something. You thought I was weak. You thought I wouldn't fight back. You underestimated the strength of a woman who has loved truly, who has given fully, and who will not be discarded like yesterday's newspaper." The room was silent. Richard stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, anger, and finally, fear. Patricia had already fled, her blue dress disappearing through the exit. Margaret stepped down from the podium. She walked past Richard without looking at him, her head high. Clara embraced her mother. Friends surrounded them, offering support and love. As Margaret left the country club that night, she felt something she hadn't expected. Freedom. 6 months later, Margaret sat on the porch of her new townhouse, smaller than the family home but entirely hers. The divorce had been finalized. She'd received her fair share, enough to live comfortably, to travel, to explore the life she'd set aside. Clara visited often, bringing her grandson, who loved hearing his grandmother's stories. "Mom, how did you do it?" Claire asked one afternoon. "How did you stay so calm?" Margaret smiled, sipping her tea. "I learned something important, sweetheart. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about justice. It's about standing up and saying, I matter. My life matters, and I won't be erased." She paused, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Your father thought he could rewrite our story. But stories don't belong to just one person. I claimed my voice. I told my truth. And that, my dear, is the most powerful thing anyone can do." Clara squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," Margaret said softly. She'd heard through mutual friends that Richard's relationship with Patricia had ended within weeks of the party. He'd moved into an apartment downtown, alone, his reputation damaged, his comfortable future uncertain. Margaret felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but she felt deep, abiding satisfaction in her own survival. 1 year later, Margaret joined a book club. She took watercolor painting classes. She volunteered at the community center, teaching cooking to young mothers. She made new friends, women who'd also rebuilt their lives after loss and betrayal. She learned to fill her days with purpose and her nights with peace, and sometimes, When the afternoon light pooled like honey through her window, Margaret would sit in her favorite chair and think about resilience, about the unexpected strength that lives within us, waiting for the moment we need it most. She'd been tested, she'd been broken, but she'd refused to stay broken, and in that refusal, she'd found not just survival, but something deeper. She'd found herself again. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is refuse to accept betrayal as our ending. Margaret's story reminds us that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. That justice isn't revenge, it's truth spoken aloud. And that new chapters can begin at any age, in any season, when we find the courage to turn the page.